he surrendered to the Americans on the 8th of May and gave a spirited defense at the subsequent Nuremberg trials in October 1946. Convicted of war crimes and sentenced to hang, Goering committed suicide by cyanide poisoning on the 15th of October 1946. Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Kamhuber served for the duration of World War I, ending the war with the rank of second lieutenant. During the interwar years, he served as a member of the Reichsheer, where he trained in secret for the Forbidden General Staff. After training as a pilot, he was one of a number of army officers that were transferred to the then still secret Luftwaffe in 1933. From then until the outbreak of the Second World War, he trained as a night fighter pilot, and by 1937 he was chief of the organizations branch. He was on active duty during the campaign in the West in 1940, when he was shot down and captured by the French. Fortunately, he was released after the French surrender. After his return to Germany, Colonel Kamhuber was placed in command of the night fighter arm of the Luftwaffe. The 1st Night Fighter Division was formed on the 20th of July 1940. The plane that was first used in this role was the Me-109, which was soon replaced by the Me-110. This plane remained the backbone of the night fighter units for the duration of the war. Kamhuber was responsible for a number of innovative measures during his command, which included the defensive system known as Himmelbelt. Under his command, the night fighters would take a heavy toll on the Allied bombing formations. However, disagreements with Goering saw him move to a command in Norway in 1943. His period of command coincided with some of Germany's most difficult times, and although Kamhuber did not bring about the defeat of the Allied bombing campaign, he did, on many occasions, force the Allied commanders to rethink and reassess their tactics. Colonel Hans-Josef Hayo Hermann was a bomber pilot during the early part of the war, and was responsible for sinking a dozen Allied ships, achievements which won him the Knight's Cross. He then transferred to the night fighting wing of the Luftwaffe and led an experimental unit, the JG-300. He constantly put forward new tactical ideas, chief among which was the wild boar strategy. Hermann later controlled the 9th Air Division and finished the war in command of the Ram Commando Elbe. He was, by this stage of the war, the holder of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords. The Messerschmitt Bf-110 had been designed as a heavy fighter in the mid-1930s. The early versions were slow and proved vulnerable when pitted against the faster fighters of the RAF. But the plane would see a new lease of life when it was adapted for use as a night fighter. The Bf-110 was powered by various Daimler-Benz 600 series 12-cylinder engines, with the last versions using the DB605B type. This engine could take the Bf-110 to a speed of around 340 miles per hour and allow it to operate to a height between 30 and 35,000 feet. Its range was up to 800 miles, and it was crewed by 2 men. The armaments varied between 2 20mm cannon and 4 7.92mm machine guns facing forward, with one additional 7.92mm machine gun facing to the rear. Later versions were fitted with 2 30mm cannon and 2 20mm cannon facing forward. The Bf-110 would be the mainstay German night fighter during the war, with just over 6,000 being manufactured. The Junkers Ju-88 was designed as a high-speed bomber and, like its stablemate, the Bf-110, was designed during the mid-1930s. It underwent various design changes during its lifespan, with the Ju-88G being the type most used in the night fighting role. It was powered by 2 Junkers Umo 200 series engines, which would take the final versions up to speeds of almost 390 miles per hour. The ceiling height was over 32,000 feet, and it had a range of almost 1,400 miles. The four-man crew had the use of 6 forward-facing 20mm cannon and 1 rear-facing 7.92mm machine gun. The Junkers Ju-88 was a highly successful aircraft that could be used in a variety of roles. As a consequence, more than 15,000 would be manufactured before the end of the war. The Krupp 8.8cm Flak 18 was better known as the 88, a weapon which would be heavily employed as the main defensive anti-aircraft weapon by the Germans. It was also highly successful when employed as an anti-tank gun. For air defence, the Flak 18 could fire a 20-pound shell up to a height of 26,000 feet, but it was not greatly accurate, and the crew had to be very experienced to score a direct hit on an aircraft travelling at that height. Its main function, therefore, was to damage aircraft and demoralise enemy air crews. Hundreds of these weapons would be employed in the defence of the Reich. They were used in conjunction with powerful searchlights that helped to illuminate enemy bombers. The Himmelbett radar system was a network of radar first employed in 1941 to detect and locate incoming enemy bombers. The first phase was the long-range Freya radar that had a range of around 150 miles. This was backed up with the shorter-range Würzburg-Riese that had a range of around 20 miles. The shorter-range radar could give height, speed, direction, and also the size of the incoming enemy formation. A second Würzburg then directed night fighters to intercept these enemy formations. Operated from a central station, the control system was a Seeberg table that used light points to represent each plane, a red light to indicate an enemy aircraft, and a blue light to indicate a night fighter. The 160 separate radar stations were spread out over the entire area of France, Belgium, Holland, Germany, Denmark, and northern Italy. The Himmelbett system was designed for defence in breadth and not in depth, and if the Allies managed to break through, they had almost free rein to deliver their deadly payload upon the cities and towns of Germany. A shortage of night fighters also hindered the Himmelbett system, preventing its better use. The Schlagermusik, or jazz music, consisted of a set of 2 cannon positioned in the roof of the night fighter in between the cockpit and the tail. These were angled at 45 degrees and faced forward. The weapon was not received well at first, but capable pilots used it to excellent effect, and its usage was increased. Taking advantage of the lack of armaments beneath an enemy aircraft, the night fighter would fly underneath an enemy bomber and fire a burst from the twin cannon, which would usually be aimed at its wings and fuel tanks. There were great dangers, however. Many night fighter aircraft were taken down with the enemy plane as it burst into flames. The Helle Nachtjagd, or night fighting by searchlight system, was introduced in 1940 as a measure against the increasing number of Allied air raids being conducted over Germany. It would prove to be the biggest threat to Allied bomber crews during the entire war, and more than 2,000 Allied planes were lost. The tactic was deadly. The radar system would detect the incoming enemy bombing formations, the belt of searchlights would illuminate the attacking bomber formations from below, and the night fighters would close in and begin to stalk their prey. They would pick an individual target and close in behind it before attacking it with their powerful cannon. The searchlight belts were positioned along the coast from Flensburg in northern Germany, across to Holland and the Belgian border, covering the Ruhr and Aachen region. The belt continued through Luxembourg and onto the eastern part of France near Nancy and Dijon. Another belt was situated further inland, covering the approaches to Berlin. It was Major Wolfgang Falk's successful experiment in the use of planes for nighttime fighting that saw the